Doug Dillaman is a man who wears many hats. He's a writer, he's a filmmaker, he's an editor. If you are involved in the Tamaki Makaurau film scene at all, there's a strong likelihood you're going to see him at a cinema for any of the kind of special screenings that happen week to week. He's also just a genuinely lovely guy. He's a good friend of mine. We are very privileged to have him in the office today to talk about Gut Instinct. So Gut Instinct is his second film after Jake, which came out in 2014, I think, and it is a science fiction film, but not quite like any other science fiction film you're likely to see this year. Let's watch. Doug, thank you for coming in today.
Thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today. Now, obviously, I've known you for a long time. I'm also familiar with Gut Instinct. It's a really wonderful film, and it's a huge achievement. Can we start by talking about what Gut Instinct is, the genesis, and how we came to be here?
Sure. So Gut Instinct is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi, sci-fact, psychedelic black comedy instructional film on acid. It's set decades in the future after a race of alien microbes who have found a home in our guts, discovered a lust for dopamine, and led to the downfall of civilization, are deeply entrenched in the guts of the remaining survivors. And Gut Instinct primarily is the purification program through which you can free your mind and your guts forever, with a little help from our friends at InterSelf. There's Gut Instinct is my second feature, and my first feature, Jake, which came out in 2014, is kind of a normal film where you have cameras filming actors walking in space and performing physical actions and reading lines, which is a really popular form of filmmaking.
Yeah, generally,
but it's also very expensive and complicated.
Yeah.
And there's Michael Clayton's come out of it, Pieces has come out of it. There's some virtues to it, but I found it a really challenging task, and I wanted to see if there was a way that I could make something different that drew on my skills of decades of editing commercial television, that brought in some of the more avant-garde and esoteric things that I liked, but was still somehow accessible to an audience. And while I was dwelling on all of this, I got food poisoning. And this was, late 2017. And I keep saying, I was feeling bad at the time, and I don't remember what happened. And then last Wednesday, we're recording this the week after the election in the States, I remembered what happened in January 2017 and why I started heavily drinking and why all that beer built up in my stomach. And then I brought a chicken pot to work, and I forgot to put it in the fridge, and I was like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And about 2 days later, and
you found out
5 pounds later, I did, but also I was feeling great, man. I just felt like I'd purged this thing that was in me that was sapping my energy, sapping my happiness, and it was just sort of a quick flight from there to kind of imagining a very small microbial invader that was inside me puppeteering. I'm like, that's a cool science fiction movie. I'll just do a little bit of research to make it sound sciencey, and then I'll go make this complete science fiction movie that could never happen. And then I started researching it and got slightly horrified that actually pretty much every single step along the way is totally plausible, which is why this film is 43% true.
Fantastic. That's a good number, I think. Well, that's what you should aim for with a film like this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what other films are like this? You've seen it.
Actually, that is a good point. I mean, it is kind of, I think I said this when I was writing about it, it is kind of, there isn't quite anything like it that I've seen this year. Yeah. It almost takes the form of like an essay film, but it's also in the form of like a information video from a hideous future. And then there's this psychedelic element as well. What went into your kind of the visual approach? What were you thinking? Did it grow out of just necessity of I'm going to make this by myself?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started with like, well, what do I have at hand? And at first that was a lot of travel video. That was me like shooting aluminum foil out of focus with a flashlight against it and getting these weird kind of visual elements that I could build things with. And very quickly somebody pointed out to me, oh, there's this whole world of public domain footage. And I had seen films like Tribulation 99 before that made great use of that. But I wanted this to be a public domain film. But there's lots of that, especially at American government websites, you know. So I have one of the same shots that Ridley Scott used in The Martian, for instance, from NASA. And so that wound up being a small element to illustrate these things, and then it became a huge element as I started playing with it and finding these lovely little quotes from these 50s educational films that, you know, if you weren't around for those, you've certainly seen Troy McClure do his equivalent, as one of my friends pointed out. And then that still wasn't enough, and I started hand painting animation and doing other things, but I realized I needed also some visual consistency that couldn't be achieved by that, and I brought on Liam McGurran, who's a really talented animator who does kind of 2D stick figure stuff and won 48 hours in 2022. And I'm like, look, we've got these alien gut microbes, and they're called the bad crobes, and we need to see the bad crobes. Can you just do this one thing for me and draw the bad crobes? And so that began what was basically 2.5 years of us trying to make each other laugh. And became a really crucial part of the visual experience of it. And then there's also just these kaleidoscopic trippy moments, which are built from everything, and a lot of me playing around in DaVinci Resolve, which is what I edited in, with light rays and kaleidoscope effects and blur effects, and bringing in different elements from hand painted cards to this travel footage to anything.
And it's you know, those segments are so overwhelming in a sense. It's like it's almost like the animations that, I mean, I was put in the mind of animations that you would see on like old school Windows multimedia player, but then turned up to 100. And it's such a trip. I mean, I kind of feel like I exited afterwards in a bit of a daze. Like, that's what I mean. It kind of feels very different to anything else. Do you think that's connected to the fact that it's just purely from your brain? It's purely like what you've constructed yourself, without that kind of having to worry about all the other things that come with traditional filmmaking?
From a budgetary perspective, there was basically nothing at stake in this film. You know, I invested 7 years of my life off and on. Let's not pretend that I was sitting there every day. There was a whole year during COVID where suddenly making a film about a global epidemic didn't seem very funny. But by and large, I could just play with it and make it what I wanted. That said, I didn't want to make it too esoteric. I wanted people to come out, and I think everyone can come out of the film and roughly explain what happens. It's just that they haven't been through that experience in a cinema before. And that was something that was very much trial and error and grasping in the dark and seeing what worked and what didn't, and you know, what you needed to do to get an audience member who, if they're going into a post-apocalyptic film, they'll be expecting to follow Clive Owen or Scarlett Johansson or whatever as they're navigating this landscape. And instead, they're literally being the person talked to as if they're in 2060 and all this bad stuff has happened. And so nailing how you get the viewer into that space, nailing how you get all that exposition out of the way and set them into that and feeling like they're in this world, and also keeping it not a complete dense overload, which is part of the reason where those animations came from, because just being talked at for 80 minutes is a lot to absorb. Absolutely. So having the breaks with, you know, 50s informational films, and also my wife Sarah Watt narrated it, and she has this lovely tone which we found over years, which we wound up summarizing as, read that as if you're talking to your 5-year-old nephew. So you're getting this gentle sort of condescending thing the whole time, which sits nicely against these 50s authoritative figures telling you that there's a killer on the loose and nobody seems to be doing much to stop him. But then also just taking breaks so words aren't coming at you.
Absolutely. And I mean, Sarah's, it is a performance in a sense.
Absolutely.
The modulations in her voice tell a lot that she's not necessarily, we don't actually know, but we kind of get the gist, right?
So there's this InterSelf company that's the #1 name in freedom camps, and you're entering a freedom camp. And there's this negotiation thing that you're going into with, like, you're being presented this very assertive presentation of your reality. But there's also a few cracks in there, like, how confident should I be in this company that's telling me to do these things, that everything will be okay, and getting just the right amount of uncertainty in there without, while still having the film feel authoritative, because I do love that being overwhelmed and going on that ride. And I thought it would be kind of, as you suggested, just sort of overwhelmed. But what we're finding out is it's also a lot of fun, and I'm just thrilled that people have been coming up to me and been like, I had a smile on my face the whole time, and I'm like, well, I did, but like my idea of fun is not necessarily everybody else's idea of fun.
Well, I think that is, you know, the fact that it is esoteric is kind of, well, not too esoteric, but it has that kind of idiosyncratic element that's purely Doug. It ties into that kind of thing where it's like, by being specific, it's universal. And it's really fun.
It is. And there's a lot of toys in the toy box as well, because there's a lot of, like, the one thing I didn't really expect in terms of audience response. So when we played in Wellington, like fully half of the people who asked me questions at the Q&A were females who worked in science, who were just really fascinated by the topic and asking me questions like, oh, do you consider the microbes essentially to be cockroaches, or talking about other elements? And there's a whole sci-fac thing in it. And even at our initial test screening, we had people fill out forms, because I screened this after not having gotten to a wide swath of festivals in the States. It's a very difficult film to fit into an existing festival, because it doesn't tick the experimental, I'm very artsy and self-important. It doesn't tick the horror film festival, there's lots of gore. And I got one comment that said it was batshit insane, and another one that said it was informative. And I don't know that there's many films that can tick both those boxes
both borders,
accurately, and that you know, I just said describe gut instinct in 10 words or less, and I love that that's where it came out of this insane 7-year gestation process.
I would agree with that, absolutely.
Thanks.
I mean, another element is that there is some element of audience participation beyond being talked to. Do you want to explain a little bit of that? Yeah,
I did not foresee that the most common film that would be compared to would be Megalopolis, considering that the budget of this wouldn't cover the wine budget for one lunch on that film.
I think I said that.
You said that, and plenty of other people have brought that up since then. And it's just, okay, well, you know,
we'll take it.
It hasn't taken quite as long as Megalopolis, and we both sold off our empires to do it. Mine was just a lot smaller. So there's. We give out purification kits at the screenings, and look, this has been really something that's been going on the fly with these interactive elements. And one of the things I'm doing with the film is doing this roadshow where I'm doing Q&As and making sure these happen. But because there's other elements I don't want to spoil. But yes, you are eating along as you watch the film, and there is this kind of complicity of just like, oh, this isn't the normal cinema experience, and what's being asked of me here, and that's something that's also I didn't know at the beginning, is that it would really be a cinematic experience. I mean, I was working with a lot of YouTube clips that didn't always seem the best resolution and things like that. I'm like, is this going to hold up on a big screen? Is anyone going to want to see it? And then when we started doing these initial test screenings, which you saw a very early cut of, I'm like, wow, I think people are responding, so I'm going to get a big 5:1 surround mix, and that was probably the biggest, outside of wasting money on film festival submissions, is probably the most expensive element of the process. And so visually, orally, and then also with these participation elements, it really is a cinema experience. And so I'm trying to keep it in cinemas across the country, anyone who will play it really, all summer, with just sort of limited event kind of screenings where it plays maybe once every 3 weeks or once a month,
like a road show.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly a road show where I can show up and do Q&As, but also that screenings can happen when I'm not there, but still have those interactive elements. And so I'm reaching out to cinemas, and some really cool offbeat locations are coming to the fore. I mean, we've screened, as I'm talking about this, we've screened 3 times, and our 4th screening is happening in Thames, which is not at the top of any publicist's list, but the Left Bank Theater there was just very eager and willing to do that, and you know, and so I'm really looking forward to getting out there and finding the communities that are hungry and eager, and the people that are really hungry and eager to have new and exciting experiences in the cinema.
Totally.
And hopefully I mean, I feel very insecure when it comes to bravado, but I'm getting a lot of feedback that this is a experience that's not very similar to.
It's a journey
things.
worth taking 100%. I mean, yeah, as I say, there is not much else like this, and it really captures this kind of independent spirit that I think needs to be fostered and appreciated by large audiences.
And filmmakers. I mean, that's
Yeah.
part of my kaupapa with it, is that there's a lot of filmmakers that are very stuck in the, oh, we'll try to get things developed in a very traditional way, and there's not a lot of slots to develop that way.
Yeah, true.
And this took me 7 years, but I know people who have spent 7 years not making a film.
That's true, absolutely. So we've had it at Terrify, but it's getting its wider release in December. Can we get some details on upcoming screenings in the months of December, January?
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I know that we played at the Capitol, and they're very eager to have us back. We've got some of these roadshow screenings happening at venues that I suspect will have us back for more, like the Lumiere in Christchurch, the Roxy in Wellington. We're booked into Motueka, where Jake played 10 years ago, and they were very thrilled to have us back there. And then, it's just a matter of reaching out and seeing who else wants to play it, and them reaching out to us, because I'm hoping it's just going to be something that snowballs. And when somebody's at a Christmas party and says, "Man, there's nothing out this year. There's a 3 superhero movies of villains I've never heard of, and there's a Disney remake, and there's a Lord of the Rings but animated, and da da da." It's like, well, I'll tell you something that you haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
We'll see. I'm building the plane as it's in the air. There wasn't really I wasn't planning to release this now. I was planning to have just had a successful American festival release and preparing a release here, and it's happening the other way around. But that's the great thing about being small, is it also means being nimble, and I've already succeeded. I made the film that I wanted to make, and people have enjoyed it. And if it doesn't connect on the larger level, then that's okay. This wasn't a film that was ever built to play in multiplexes. It was a film meant for a few weirdos like me, and it's outstripped its goal, so everything else is gravy.
I'm really stoked for you, Doug.
Thanks. It's been a great ride so far.
Yeah, it's a really special film, and you should be very proud. Please go along if you can and see the wonderful Gut Instincts.
And screenings will be updated at gutinstinctfilm.net. And we also have a Facebook page if you want to wait for when Facebook tells you when the screenings are happening. But there's a mailing list on the Gut Instinct page, and that's probably your easiest way to find out. Or, our friends at Flix always keep people posted as well.
Fantastic. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for letting me talk about this film. I love it.
Me too.
Cheers, man.
Cheers, mate.